on today's show, insight into what Stephen Silas may be planning to do with the Rockets starting lineup this next season. We'll take a look at that. We'll take a look at some of the pros and cons of the two names mentioned directly by Stephen Silas that he would like to play for a majority of their minutes together in the lineup next season. And then we'll take a look at the 5 best defenders going into training camp on this Houston Rockets roster. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as the founder of ClutchCityControlRoom.com. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, where you can help the show out tremendously if you comment on the show. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. For today's episode, we're going to take a look at what Stephen Silas told 610's Adam Spolane at Summer League, an exclusive interview by Adam Spolane, talking about some of his plans for this group of Houston Rockets players next season, maybe some insight into what we can expect with the Rockets lineup next season. So we'll take a peek at that. We'll take a look at some of the pros and cons as to the two names that Stephen Silas mentioned specifically and how they may be able to benefit from playing together for a majority of their minutes. And then in the final segment, we'll take a look at the 5 best defenders going into training camp on this Houston Rockets roster. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of grief for the list that I picked out, so we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But let's start out. Now, in an exclusive interview with 610's Adam Spolane at Summer League, Stephen Silas spoke for about 10 minutes, kind of discussing some of his thoughts on the young guys, some of his plans for next season. I'm going to put the link to the interview in the description of this episode if you'd like to go check out the whole thing. Definitely do it. It was a great, exclusive interview by Adam Spolane. Love the work that he does for 610. He does a great job covering Rockets and Astros for his station. Now, the bit that I really want to highlight here is at one point when discussing the idea that, Jabari is going to start. That was kind of a given for a lot of us. Jabari Smith is going to start. And then at one point, Stephen Silas mentioned the fact that he likes the idea of pairing Jae'Sean Tate and Alperen Sengun and having those two guys share the majority of their minutes together on the floor, because it prevents opposing teams from putting their 5 on Jae'Sean Tate. And it was a very quick little snippet in the interview, but there's a lot that we can extrapolate from that. And so the immediate reaction to that is, Jae'Sean Tate's going to be the starter for the Houston Rockets. And in fact, later in the interview, Stephen Silas does praise Jae'Sean Tate immensely in the fact that he specifically does say JT became a starter, got into the starting lineup, and it was impossible to take him out of the starting lineup. That's just how good he is. So the smart money would be on Jae'Sean Tate to be the starter at the 3 spot for the Houston Rockets this next season. So KPJ, Jalen, Jae'Sean Tate, Jabari Smith, and Alperen Sengun. And I think from there, I want to look at the pros and the cons of that kind of being the potential starting lineup for the Houston Rockets and kind of trying to extrapolate some information from that statement that Stephen Silas had. And the first thing is, I'm in agreement with Stephen Silas. I can't deny the fact that other teams did start to exploit the Rockets and their spacing offensively by stationing a 5-man, stationing a center on Jae'Sean Tate. And by doing so, and we saw this a lot to round out the end of the season for the Rockets, by doing this, it messed up all the spacing for the Rockets offensively. It cut off driving lanes. It really kind of mucked things up for them offensively. And unfortunately, Jae'Sean Tate, without the consistent three ball, wasn't able to make opposing centers pay for sagging off of him, right? For collapsing into the paint, for crowding things offensively and messing up the Rockets spacing. Hopefully that's different this time around, but I do like the idea of pairing Jae'Sean Tate with Alperen Sengun, because when Jae'Sean Tate was out there with Christian Wood, other teams could get away with putting their center on Jae'Sean Tate because Christian Wood couldn't make smaller players pay for guarding him, right? You could station a wing on Christian Wood or even a smaller player on Christian Wood, and he didn't have the ability to post them up and to punish them offensively for a switch as far as their defensive scheme is concerned like that, right? You could just throw whoever you wanted on Christian Wood, and unless it was like a really small guard, like he wasn't going to punish them down low. Alperen Sengun, completely different animal offensively. Alp is going to Alp punishes big men when they're guarding him, right? So if you try to get away with throwing a wing on Alp and putting your center on Jae'Sean Tate, doesn't even matter about the spacing because you just dump the ball into Alperen Sengun and he is going to absolutely destroy whoever's guarding him on the low block. So that kind of inherently prevents that from being a mismatch opportunity for the other team. Now, as far as the rest of the lineup is concerned, I do like the idea of continuing to have Jae'Sean Tate in the starting lineup because he has grown into kind of a stabilizing force for this Rockets team, a veteran voice for this Rockets team, right? Even though he's only going into his third year, even though he just finished his sophomore season, he already came in as a rookie that was a bit of an older rookie, right? A more mature rookie, had spent his time overseas. And right now, even though he's very much, I think, still part of the Rockets' young core, quote unquote, he should also be viewed as one of the veterans on the roster, right? A guy who the young guys can kind of lean on, can kind of take part in some of his wisdom, some of his experiences, some of the way that he approaches the game, his work ethic, the different things that he's had to do, right? Because he took that kind of, scenic route to make it to the NBA, but he's put in a ton of work to get to the point that he's at, right? And I think in a way, that maybe garners him even more respect than you'd get from a regular 26-year-old NBA veteran, somebody who's maybe a journeyman bouncing from team to team, right? The fact that Jae'Sean Tate had to go that extra mile, had to put in all the work that he did, probably helps kind of helps have his voice carry a little bit further in that Rockets locker room. So from that perspective, I do like the idea of him being in the starting lineup. And even though Stephen Silas didn't say, right, I'm definitely starting Jae'Sean Tate, I think that it's safe to assume that if you want to pair Jae'Sean Tate and Alperen Sengun for a majority of their minutes together, then what better way to do that than to have Jae'Sean Tate be in the starting lineup alongside Alperen Sengun? That's what ultimately makes a ton of sense to me. And then lastly, my last kind of positive note in this regard, before we get into some of the potential cons with having Jae'Sean Tate in the starting lineup alongside Alp, the fact that, one, it gives you another incredibly plus defender in the starting lineup. It gives you somebody who is switchable, maybe not all the way quite through 1 through 5, but just an incredibly versatile, switchy defender. It gives you that guy who you take him out there, you throw him on the number one, option for the opposing team. Whoever their best wing player is, bam, Jae'Sean Tate's checking him. Put Jabari Smith Jr. on the second best player. Put KPJ on the third best player, and then you hide Jalen Green on whoever the weakest offensive option is. That's great. And then offensively, I do think there are some pros to having Tate and Sengun share the floor together. I know that everybody's going to be immediately worried about the spacing, about the shooting, and I'll touch on that in segment 2. But I do think that those two guys, when you are the level of passer that Alperen Sengun is, and to his credit, Jae'Sean Tate has a good amount of court vision himself, as well as offensive awareness and just kind of where to be, how to cut, how to set screens, how to move effectively within a half-court offense and not take up space or not take up negative space, right? Not crowd things. I think that those two guys can coexist and play off of one another effectively, right? The issue that we saw last season with the double big lineup struggles weren't really the double big lineup struggles. It was a lot of it was predicated on the fact that Daniel Theis couldn't really do anything other than shoot the basketball when he got it, right? He couldn't play make, he couldn't drive the ball in, he couldn't kick it out for another, he couldn't post up. There were very limited things that you could do with Daniel Theis in the lineup. And so having Daniel Tice, a non-shooter, alongside Jae'Sean Tate, another non-shooter at the time, did definitely muck things up for the Rockets. Having Alp, if he's not shooting the ball well, and having Jae'Sean Tate out there, if he's not shooting the ball well, might end poorly for the Rockets. But because those two can pass at such a high level, I think that having them out there with three other guys in Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green, and Jabari Smith Jr., who can all be effective knockdown shooters, should unlock some possibilities with that lineup. And so that's where I'm cautiously optimistic about their playmaking outweighing any potential negative floor spacing due to lack of shooting. So those are the kind of pros and immediate takeaways from that commentary. Again, the link to the full exclusive interview by Adam Spolane is in the description of this episode. I do want to talk about some of the cons of having Jae'Sean Tate in the starting lineup possibly, and kind of what that means having his minutes paired up with Alperen Sengun for a majority of their play together. We're going to get there after a quick message from our friends over at Built Bar, because look, when it comes to protein bars, you got to check out Built Bar. They're the #1 protein bar on the market, and for pretty good reason. Every single bar is coated in 100% delicious chocolate. They're basically candy bars that are jam-packed with protein. Every bar is low-cal, low-sugar, high-protein, high-fiber. Amazing if you're on a keto diet. Amazing if you're trying to cut back a little bit, maybe lose a little bit of weight. And the flavors, they've got a flavor list that goes on and on and on. They got raspberry, strawberry, salted caramel, cookies and cream, mint brownie, mint chocolate, peanut butter, coconut brownie chunk. That's my #1 favorite. You really can't go wrong with any of them. Birthday cake flavor. It's so many unique flavors to choose from. It's like you're perusing a luxurious, European dessert gallery, not taking a look at some protein bars online. You could check them out. Just go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your very next order of the best tasting protein bars on the market. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Let's keep our discussion focused on what it means. Stephen Silas saying that he would like to pair Jae'Sean Tate and Alperen Sengun for a majority of their minutes together. Let's look at the flip side of this, right? The potential cons in what this means. And I already referenced it there in segment 1, but the first place everybody's mind goes to when thinking about Jae'Sean Tate starting alongside LP or playing a majority of his minutes alongside LP is the spacing, right? Is the shooting issue. And I understand the concern because look, in 2 years of NBA action, Jae'Sean Tate has yet to improve that three ball. He shot .308, so 31% effectively from downtown his first year as a rookie. Then he shot .312 from downtown his second year as a sophomore. So he is averaging 31% from three throughout his 2 NBA seasons. Now, silver lining, he did shoot significantly better from beyond the arc post All-Star break at the end of last season. However, and that was 38% on 2.5 attempts per game in 22 games post All-Star break. But that should tell you, right, if he shot 38% from behind the arc in the remaining 22 games of the season, and he still only shot just over a hair over 31% for the year, that should tell you how bad the three-point shooting was in the games before the All-Star break, right? So the biggest issue there has been the inconsistency from three. That's been the one knock that I've had on his game since he joined the Houston Rockets. He brings so much else to the table that if he could just get the three ball up to a place where it's at least respectable, right? 34, 35, anything north of 35% would be a godsend if he could get it to that point. So I do think the shooting becomes an immediate concern, right? Because what you need when you have dynamic, drivers, scorers like KPJ and Jalen Green in the lineup is they need to have driving lanes, right? They need to have space to operate within an offense. And if Jae'Sean Tate and Alperen Sengun can't make up for a lack of shooting on their behalves with their ability to play make and create for other players on the floor, then we're going to get into an issue where defenses are going to routinely be sagging off of those two guys if they're sharing the floor together for, substantial minutes. Then those two guys are going to have their defenders be sagging off of them, cutting off driving lanes and clogging up the paint, clogging up the interior, preventing opportunities for KPJ to drive, preventing opportunities for Jalen Green to drive. And then that prevents opportunities to create shots, right? For guys like Jabari Smith elsewhere in the lineup, or for KPJ to create and kick it out to Jalen Green so that he gets to attack off the catch, right? Second action within the offense, all these different things. And it would, unfortunately resemble some of what we saw in the Rockets' 15-game losing streak when they had a starting lineup that consisted of Jae'Sean Tate and Daniel Tice. Now, I already kind of aired my opinions that I think that both JT and Alp are capable of overcoming their lack of shooting if necessary to, rely on their ability to play make for their teammates at a high enough level that it still provides spacing. It still unlocks something unique within that Rockets offense. But that's concern number one, right? Concern number two for me would be, what does this mean for Eric Gordon, right? Now, I do think that for EG, he has been comfortable coming off the bench in the past. He seems incredibly bought into this role as the veteran mentor for this young Rockets team. And I don't think it would be that much of a tough sell to ask him to come off the bench for 20 to 25 minutes a night, right? You're going to have to divvy up these minutes eventually. You're going to have to also wean these young guys off of Eric Gordon eventually, right? Because he's not going to be around forever. Having him stick around for a little bit longer, right? Maybe he's around for, this first half of the upcoming season, and they are able to flip him at the All-Star break for some draft capital or, first round pick or package deal, what have you, right? Maybe he's just around for half this next season before they send him off to a contender, and having him come off the bench and still kind of showcase some of his skills is the best way to go about doing it, rather than making him a focal point within the Rockets offense, right? Because if you do roll JT out there, Jae'Sean Tate, then he has the ability to continue growing and forming relationships with these guys, a long-term relationship, right? Long-term chemistry that's going to matter, a year or two further down the line, rather than Eric Gordon, who is essentially just kind of a placeholder at this point, right? He's the veteran that you want to have on the roster to teach these young guys how to be pros. But at the same time, he's very much, got that air about him where it's just the way the Rockets utilized him last season was very much like, all right, he's just going to stay out of the way until they desperately need a bucket, right? He's just going to sit on the three-point line, out of the way, let the young guys do their thing. And if the play blows up, if they need a bucket, all right, well, Eric, go to the top of the key and just bully ball your way in for two, right? That was kind of how the Rockets utilized Eric Gordon for chunks of last season. It was basically the safety net within the Rockets offense on the floor for all the young guys. He was out there kind of just babysitting the kids. So he can still do that effectively from the bench. It's just whether or not he's bought into that idea, right? If he's okay shifting his role back to the bench, then so be it, right? Maybe that's not necessarily worthy of being number 2 on the cons list, but it's at least something that comes to the forefront of my mind is how does this impact Eric Gordon and whether or not he's okay with it, right? He was okay coming off the bench when the Rockets were a contender. Will he be okay coming off the bench when the Rockets are, one of the worst teams in the association? Next thing that I worry about is the size element, right? And thankfully, this will change just by the sheer fact of adding Jabari Smith into the Rockets starting lineup and then having Alperen Sengun as the Rockets starting 5. They are immediately a significantly bigger team than they were last season. Just by, again, you replace Christian Wood with Alperen Sengun, and you replace 6'4" Jae'Sean Tate at power forward with 6'11", possibly 7-foot tall Jabari Smith, who looks like a potential defensive anchor for this Rockets team. The Rockets are going to be a gigantic team, at least in those 2 front court spots this next season. But could they be even bigger, right? And that's the other thing that I do worry about a little bit is if you're starting Jae'Sean Tate at 6'4" at the 3 spot, he is still a bit undersized. Now, I do think that he, as far as his skill level on defense, absolutely makes up for the slight size difference that you maybe give up. And because he'd be playing his more natural position at small forward, as far as just his size is concerned, when you look at his, physicals, his measurables as an NBA player, his natural position is probably the 3, right? Not power forward, not, 2 guard, whatever. He's a 3, he's a wing, play him at the small forward spot. I don't want to say it's necessarily an outright con, but the Rockets do have other guys that are bigger and that could provide a bit more of a presence at that 3 spot, right? They've got Tari Eason now. They've got KJ Martin, who is about, 6'6", 6'7", can leap out of the gym, gives you a bit more size at that 3 spot, gives you consistent shooting, at least that we have a sample size of that is, that we're confident in, not rumors from what the shot has looked like over training or, over the summer. So there are some pros and cons there as far as what it means to have, again, a smaller 6'4" guy at your 3 spot, because you do give up a little bit of size there on the wing. I don't think it's nearly as bad as when they were running him at the power forward spot, but it is at least something worth monitoring. And then the last thing here, maybe this isn't necessarily, again, a true outright con, but it's at least something that popped into my head. Right? Wouldn't it be nice to kind of divvy up, like have Jae'Sean Tate come off the bench and kind of be that secondary playmaker for the second unit? Like that was one of the areas that I thought of when I was trying to figure out, okay, well, who's the starting lineup going to be for this Houston Rockets team? If you're running Eric Gordon in the starting lineup, again, he very much can be effective without the basketball in his hands, right? You just put him 5 feet behind the 3-point line. He spaces things out incredibly for the team, and then he can be that safety net when he's on the floor. Whereas Jae'Sean Tate doesn't exactly give you that level of spacing offensively, and he is almost at his best, right? When he can get the ball in transition, when he can create, when he can cut, when he can kick the ball back out to an open shooter, right? And that skill set might be more beneficial if he's running in tandem with the second unit rather than being in the starting lineup alongside Alperen Sengun. And hey, maybe that is what we see, right? Maybe that is something that Stephen Silas decides he wants to lean on, right, is early substitutions for both for Jae'Sean Tate and Alperen Sengun, right? Maybe it's something where those two guys are subbed out at the 6 or 7 minute mark of the first quarter, and then the Rockets, maybe they go small for a stretch of the game, right? They run Jabari Smith Jr. at the 5 spot, and then they go 5 out for a little bit, or they check in Usman Garuba and let him get some burn. And then they come back with Jae'Sean Tate and Alperen Sengun somewhere there in the second quarter, right? Or the end of the first quarter, right? There's a lot of different, options that they have to anchor and tether LP and JT together without necessitating the fact that those guys also share a majority of their minutes with KPJ, Jalen Green, and Jabari Smith Jr. So there's a lot of different ways that Stephen Silas can get really creative about this, but I do love the fact that he was kind of open about this, because Stephen Silas, for the most part, doesn't really give us a glimpse into his thinking as far as his lineup goes and how he's kind of game planning certain things. So for us to get this little nugget of information months ahead of the NBA season, or even, months ahead of training camp, is kind of nice, because it allows us to speculate on what this Rockets roster could potentially look like a little bit further down the line once we get through training camp, once we get to opening night. So right now, my money is on Jae'Sean Tate being the starter for this Rockets team and Eric Gordon coming off the bench. I've kind of laid out my pros and cons for what that potentially means for this Rockets team. Coming up, final segment, I do want to talk about the rest of the defenders on this Houston Rockets team, and I want to at least lay out my way too early preliminary 5 best defenders on this Houston Rockets team going into training camp as we kind of navigate the rest of the dog days of NBA offseason, and we'll get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Also, if you like us on the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, go drop us a 5-star review. I don't pedal for reviews that often anymore, but they do really help the show out. I know I've been begging for YouTube comments. Those are incredibly helpful as well. Any way you want to show some love and support to the show, I would sincerely appreciate it. Now, I may get some flack for this list because I wanted to sit here and, right, the Rockets have kind of gone through this, revamp of players on this roster, and we could be looking at a newfound defensive identity for this Houston Rockets team next season, right out of the gate, opening night. And I wanted to sit here and think about for a moment, who are the 5 best defenders, or who projects to be the 5 best defenders on this Rockets team come opening night. And I may be jumping the gun here a little bit with this list. It's distinctly possible, but I'm going to stick to my gut on this one. And here we go. I've listed these guys out from 1 through 5 on who I think will be the best defenders come opening night, the most impactful defenders, whatever, come opening night for the Houston Rockets next season, 2022. Here it goes. I've got at the top of my list, Jabari Smith Jr., number 1. It may be a bit absurd to put a rookie at number 1 on this list. However, I do think that based on what we saw at a summer league, based on the tape that we have from him at Auburn, the understanding that he has of the NBA game, the size, the measurables, all of that, I think that he will be the best defender for the Houston Rockets in a Rockets jersey come opening night next season. I really grappled with this, right? I really did. And because the next couple names on this list are incredibly solid defenders, right? And very much have, could stake a claim for best defender on the Rockets. And so it took me a moment, but I settled into it, and I'm going to stick with my gut on this one. I'm putting Jabari Smith Jr. at number 1 on my best defenders on the Rockets list. At number 2 on this list, with an asterisk, would be Usman Garuba. And I say asterisk, right, because we just haven't seen enough from Uzi. And it's tough, right, because Rafael Stone called him the best defender in the world, not in the NBA. I want to see Olympic Garuba again, right? I want to see the Usman Garuba that locked up KD during the Olympics, because that was something special. That was the Garuba that I hoped that we would be seeing in Houston, and we have yet to see that version of him on NBA hardwood. So if Usman Garuba is healthy, number 1, and 2, if he gets adequate playing time and consistent playing time, I think he would be the second best defender on the Houston Rockets. So I had to put him there on the list with the put 4 asterisks next to his name, because there's, the injury concerns, there's the inconsistent minutes, there's just all of that, right? We just haven't seen it yet. So I'm going to table that for a moment. So the actual number 2 on the list, right? Number 2 with no asterisk. And this is actually going to be number 2 and number 3 on the list, because I feel like you could make an argument either way for these next 2 guys. Eric Gordon and Jae'Sean Tate. I could see an argument for either one of them being the second or third best defender on the team, because both of them are premier perimeter defenders. When they want to lock somebody down, they can do it, right? Think about all the years of Eric Gordon having Donovan Mitchell in hell during the Rockets Jazz playoff series. Think about when Eric Gordon wants to lock somebody down, he can do it, right? It's all about if Eric Gordon is motivated to play top tier defense. And there were plenty of times this past season where EG was simply just going through the motions defensively. But then there were also plenty of times where EG completely locked in mentally when the Rockets were actually playing a game that they were in it and potentially going to win. And, it was a close game down the stretch. EG can lock in, and not many players can just flip a switch and go from, going through the motions and then being uber competitive all of a sudden. EG very much can do that. And so defensively, when he has it on, I'd probably give EG the slight defensive edge over Jae'Sean Tate. He is just that stellar of a defender. Not quite all NBA level, not quite to that point, but one hell of a plus defender on the basketball floor. And then the flip side of that is Jae'Sean Tate, right? Again, another premier wing defender, somebody who is switchable and knows how to guard bigger players, knows how to utilize his size and his strength to not get completely beaten out on the interior, knows how to box out, knows how to finish possessions strong with rebounding, does all the dirty work for a team, right? He is that, bring your lunch pail to work, your hard hat and your lunch pail type of guy. He's going to do the dirty work. He's going to make the hustle plays, brings all the intangibles to the table, as well as just an abundance of skill defensively. I still think one of my favorite defensive highlights ever of Jae'Sean Tate was when the Rockets were in Brooklyn, and this was 2 seasons ago? Yeah, I think it was the end of the 2021 season before they'd even drafted Jalen Green, I think. And they were in Brooklyn, and Kyrie Irving was trying to make a move on Jae'Sean Tate, and he had him in triple threat, and Jae'Sean Tate had him bumped up against the corner and had his arms out to his sides, but back so that he wouldn't foul, and then had his body had his chest right in Kyrie Irving's shoulder and didn't let him go anywhere, right? Kyrie Irving has made some of the best defenders in the NBA look foolish. And even though it was one moment, right, it was really cool to see Jae'Sean Tate kind of body up to him, lock him up, and force him into what ultimately became a really difficult shot on that possession, if memory serves. So, JT is a phenomenal defender. And so I could accept either option there at 2 or 3 for the Houston Rockets as far as those 2 guys, Eric Gordon, Jae'Sean Tate, are concerned for best defenders on the team. 4th place, and this is again where I might get some significant pushback here, right? Maybe this is me being a little bit too overeager after Summer League, but I do think that based on the physicals, I'm going to give Tari Eason 4th place as far as best defender on the Rockets. And this is the one that I'm most sketched out about, because I do think that Tari Eason is going to struggle with foul trouble. I think that's going to be the one area of his game, very much like Alperen Sengun struggled with foul trouble a lot in his rookie year. I think that Tari Eason is going to face the same issue. I think that Tari Eason is going to go out there and play with a ton of energy, make some really aggressive plays on defense, and he's going to rack up fouls like no other. And so that's going to be the one area of his game that he's going to have to really learn how to be aggressive defensively without fouling. And that's always a huge adjustment for rookies at the NBA level. But that said, he brings a tenaciousness on the defensive side of the ball, a level of versatility, the size, the speed, the athleticism, the wingspan, the hands, all of it, right? The defensive IQ, the anticipation, all these different traits that he brings to the table. I feel very comfortable at least including him in the top 5 defenders already at this point. I don't think there's anybody else on the Rockets roster that I'd feel comfortable, aside from the 3 guys that I've already named, technically 4 if you count Uzi. Apart from those 4 guys, I don't think there's anybody else on the Rockets roster that I can point to and say, yeah, that guy is definitively a better defender than Tari Eason right now, even though Tari hasn't even stepped foot on an NBA court for a single minute yet. That's how good of a defender he is, and that's how good of a defender I project him to be at the NBA level. Lastly on this list, I'm going to go Kevin Porter Jr. KPJ has shown immense strides defensively and has even taken it upon himself, right, to be tasked with some of the tougher defensive assignments over the course of his, season and a half with the Rockets, especially this past season, right? He put the onus on himself at times to check the opposing team's best player. Think about the times where he actively sought out switches onto guys like LeBron James or Luka Doncic or Ja Morant, where he was like, no, I've got him, right? I'm going to check him. And it's that mentality from KPJ where he realizes that he needs to be more than just an offensive force, right? Where he can impact the game using his size, using his length, using his quickness defensively to break things up, to read things, to anticipate things, and to help his team on that side of the floor as well. That's a mentality, right? That's a mental component. And it takes, again, it's nice to hear players say those things in media availabilities and in little PR stunts and all that stuff. It's another thing to see a player take that and really make it a part of their game. Now, do I think that, KPJ is going to be chasing, DPOY trophies at any point in his career? Probably not. No, well, sorry, not probably not. Definitely not, right? But having a guy like KPJ with all the offensive talent that he has also take pride in his defense does wonders for your team, right? Seeing a guy like that who could very easily make the, who could make the argument, oh, well, I shoulder a lot of the offensive load, so I'll kind of let the other guys do their thing on defense and I'll just worry about me offensively, right? No. And that extends across the Rockets' entire lineup, right? Because Jabari has that mentality. Tari has that mentality. Tate has that mentality. Jalen has that mentality, right? They've all got this similar workhorse mentality of what more can I do to benefit and impact my team and give us the best chance possible to win games. So I like KPJ there in that 5th spot. I feel comfortable ranking him the 5th best defender on the Rockets roster. So those are my 5 best defenders on the Rockets roster. Technically, it's a 6-person list with the, asterisk behind Usman Garuba at spot number 2. So with that, I want to know, how do you feel about that 5-person list, right? Let me know in the YouTube comments. How do you feel about Stephen Silas planning to tentatively planning to pair Jae'Sean Tate and his minutes with Alperen Sengun this upcoming season? Do you think I'm overstepping here in thinking that it means that Jae'Sean Tate is going to be the de facto starter for the Rockets this next season? Let me know in the YouTube comments. I do read each and every one of those every single day. As always, appreciate you for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all platforms, again, including YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts about everything we discussed in today's show in the comments. I do look forward to seeing, how do you guys feel about that top 5 defender list? Because I feel pretty confident about it, but I do think you can make some arguments for some other guys. I do think you can maybe shift some of those guys around a little bit. So let me know in the comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.